Hi, True Avatars, and welcome back to another episode of True Avatars, a queer video game podcast. This is episode 7, and I am your host, Zoe Wild. My pronouns are she, her. I am a trans feminine gamer and YouTuber, and I'm also bisexual. This week I'm joined by my friend Amy, also known as Ekamy, on Twitch. Amy is bisexual and has been exploring and considering pansexuality. Amy's pronouns are she, her. Hi, Amy.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for joining me. So, just to break the ice and kind of get us into the groove of things, what have you been playing lately?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, there's been a couple games that I've got on the docket lately. I stream quite a few of them. I stream more often than not, like just various games, and off stream I play a couple games. But lately on stream I've been replaying In Stars in Time. I've played through it already once, and now I'm going for the Two Hats ending or the true ending. And for those streams are kind of fun because I'm cosplaying as one of the characters in the game, so it's like a webcam stream. I've also been playing the Rocky Horror Show video game. I played that towards the end of October because it released pretty recently and had a lot of fun with that.
There's a video game based on Rocky Horror?
There is. It just came out. Well, it came out, I think it was like October 20th, around then. It was, it's by the same, I don't remember the other game they've made, but it's from Freak Zone Games. That's the developer. And they've made a couple other games. It was a lot of fun. It's a platformer, and it's kind of old school pixel style. They redid all the songs in that kind of like, not chiptune necessarily, but that kind of vibe. And it's very good. It's short, but it's very good.
Oh my god! Okay, I just looked it up and it looks like a Super Nintendo game.
Yeah,
it looks so good.
It's so fun. If you're interested in the playthrough, I did it on stream, but yeah, it's super fun.
It also looks like it's a decent price too. It looks like in Canadian dollars, it's about $13, which is pretty good.
Yeah, I used the gift card that you gave me for my birthday for it to get it on Switch. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one. And other games, I've recently finished Sea of Stars, which was like a really highly praised game, really gorgeous, great gameplay. Story and characters I felt maybe were a little lacking, but I still enjoyed it. And lots of demos. I've played a ton of demos the past couple weeks. And then off stream, I've been playing a lot of Final Fantasy 16, so I'm close to finishing that one.
Oh yeah, Final Fantasy 16 is on my list as well. How is that one so far?
It's good. It's got its ups and downs, I would say. I feel like the beginning of the game, or at least the first maybe 3 hours, are so good and really immerse the player, and it's just so like, oh, epic and awesome, and like you're so excited for it. And then the most of the game is just kind of weirdly a little flat with like characters, and like story feels a bit long. But now it's like ramping up in like that like third quarter of the game, and I'm really into it. I played a lot of it when I was sick a couple weeks ago, and I was like super into it. So I'm probably maybe 4 chapters away from the ending now, and I'm very interested to see how it ends, because it feels like it did a big turnaround for me in terms of how I've enjoyed it. So it's been good.
So I've heard a lot of people compare it to Game of Thrones, even the people that made the game, like the Square Enix devs. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, like on a scale of 0 to Game of Thrones, like how Game of Thrones is. I don't actually know if you've seen Game of Thrones, but
I have. I've seen everything for Game of Thrones, I guess, up to House of Dragon, I suppose, or if that's the name of the show, I don't quite remember. But
I think it is. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's pretty Game of Thrones. It's I mean, it's very like westernized high fantasy. That's what it feels like, because you're in a very like UK inspired kind of like kingdom and realm, and it's to be honest, it probably has a lot of the shortcomings, I would say, of like Game of Thrones in comparison to other like high fantasy stories that I've read or watched or played. I guess I would say it's like Game of Thrones without a bunch of the gratuitous like sex scenes with women. So
fair.
Better.
And I hope the ending is better too.
Yeah, I hope so too. Oh.
So for me, what I've been playing lately is, I was playing Silent Hill 2. I was trying to play Astrobot. But my partner has hijacked my PS5 because she has started playing Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Nice.
She watched me play it. She watched me play Rebirth, and now she's hooked. So I have to fight for my life to get access to the PS5. But I've been playing in the meantime. I was like, well, I want to go play a queer game to like talk about on the podcast. And I had one recommended to me, which I haven't started playing yet. It's called The Missing, I think.
Oh,
something JJ Macfield. I can never remember the name of this game.
That's a great game. I love it.
Yeah?
It's so good. Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I found it on... Someone recommended it to me on Twitter a few weeks ago. And when they happened to recommend it to me, it was the last day of the sale on PlayStation. It was normally 40 Canadian. I got it for 10. And then nice. I downloaded it, and I was like, I'm going to play this as soon as I'm done Silent Hill 2. It's on my PS5, so again... My PS5 is like in another dimension right now. So, but I've been playing Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, the remake on Switch. And at first I thought like the first half an hour or so, I was like, this is kind of dumb. I was like, this is a bit silly. Like this is like Mario hammed up even more than Mario is hammed up. But then once you get into it, like I actually really like the gameplay. Like it's really hard for me to get into new RPGs. Like it took me like decades to move from Pokemon to Final Fantasy. And now that I've like broken that ice with myself, I'm now starting to play other RPGs. So Paper Mario was the next one I played because it has a trans character. So there's this character, for anyone who doesn't know, there's a character in the game called Vivian, and she's part of a group called the Three Shadow Sisters. And so far I'm only a few hours into the game, but I've only seen one interaction, which is a boss fight with the group. But the three sisters, the oldest one, Beldam, is bullying the youngest one, Vivian, who's trans, because Beldam keeps saying like, well, it's only called the Three Shadows, not the Three Shadow Sisters, because, you know, we're not all sisters. And Vivian says, well, I like it when you call it the Three Shadow Sisters because it makes me feel like one of the sisters. Which it's like really sweet, and it's really sad too. Like it's very accurate for like how trans people feel. Like there's always someone in a group that's like, well, I'm not going to respect your name and pronouns and your gender identity. But then when your gender identity does get respected, like it feels very comforting. And everything that comes out of Vivian's mouth in the game, in the dialogue, is very accurate, and which is kind of surprising because this dialogue is 20 years old, and I wasn't expecting that from a gaming company that's not really known for being super progressive. Like they're not conservative, I would say, in the sense of like in terms of politics. Like they actually have really good policies behind closed doors for trans and gay employees. But
that's great.
So, yeah. Have you played any of the Paper Mario games before?
I've played the first one. It was one of the first N64 games I had growing up. And I mean, I say had, I borrowed it from a friend and then from like the Blockbuster, the local Blockbuster. But played through that one, really enjoyed it. And I've seen a playthrough of the Thousand Year Door, but I don't remember too much about it.
Well, it's super cute game. I don't know if it's gone on sale yet because it's a recent game and it's Nintendo, so... They very rarely put stuff on sale. And when they do, I notice like there are actually a lot of Nintendo sales, but you've got to like watch like El Babbins or Nintendeals or Wario64 on Twitter. You've got to watch to see like when like Amazon has a random sale on a handful of Switch games, because otherwise it's like at Black Friday, Nintendo's like, here's the same 6 games we put on sale for the last 7 years, and they're on sale again for the exact same price they have been for the last 7 years. So I doubt Paper Mario will be part of that, but you could also borrow my copy when I'm done with it too. So.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, the only thing is like if you can play it on GameCube, I think it depends like what frame rate you want. I think the biggest thing is like the resolution goes up on Switch, but the frame rate goes down to 30, whereas it's easier for the button timing on GameCube because all the attacks are timing based. Like it's not just simply like pressing an attack to use. It's like when Mario swings the hammer, you've got to figure that out, and that took me a while too. I was having the biggest brain fart. I was feverish while I was playing the game. They were like, swing the hammer. So, and when swing the hammer, you have to like push the joystick one way. And I kept you're supposed to push it left, and I kept pushing it right. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm trying to swing the hammer. And then I realized like 20 minutes later, I was like, oh, I'm dumb.
Well, I mean, Paper Mario's always had those like kind of very unique time-based attacks for the RPGs. So, I mean, I remember like, when I was playing the first one when I was very young, I played most of the game up until there was like a boss, which was like a cloud who could like separate into like, I think 10 other clouds that kind of surrounded him. And I could not for the life of me beat this guy. And I didn't really replay the game and actually beat it until recently with my partner. But But I honestly, I chalk a lot of my ability when I was like fighting against him up to like confusing controls and timing, because I have terrible timing.
Yeah, same. Like, even I did get one. There's like two different ways to guard in Paper Mario, at least the Thousand Year Door. I've never played 64, so I'm not sure how similar it is. I know each Paper Mario game, they change up the controls a lot, but you can do a regular guard and then you can do a super guard. And a regular guard gives you a wider window to press the A button, and you take a little bit of damage, but less. Whereas a super guard gives damage back to the enemy and also protects you from taking damage. And I've only gotten one super guard timed but the time I got it, I felt like a god. I was like, I did it, and then I messed up the next 20. So, but anyway, let's move on to the news, because it's been a slow news cycle, I feel like, for video games lately, but the news we do have is actually kind of big, or at least one of the headlines is pretty big, because, and again, it feels like a drop in the middle. I was telling you earlier, this feels like a drop in the middle of a drop of water in the middle of the desert, but Nintendo Switch 2, Nintendo had a big investor meeting this week, and the one little tidbit of information that came out of it, besides like, sales data and stuff like that, is that the Switch 2, well, they didn't say it's called the Switch 2, but we're all going to assume it's the Switch 2 based on this news. The Switch 2 is backwards compatible with the Switch 1, and NSO is going to carry forward. So the actual statement on Twitter was this. This is Furukawa. At today's corporate management policy briefing, we announced that Nintendo Switch software will also be playable on the successor to Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch Online will be available on the successor to Nintendo Switch as well. Further information about the successor to Nintendo Switch, including its compatibility with Nintendo Switch, will be announced at a later date. End tweet. So, I mean, so the first thing that everyone thought of, and I thought of this too, is like, does this mean that it's going to be digital software? Does this mean it's going to be physical software? Is it going to be both? But I did see one tweet, and unfortunately the screenshot I saw of it was not sourced, so they cut off the username. So I can't verify this entirely. And also my Japanese is not super great at the moment. I'm still learning, but according to a native Japanese speaker on Twitter, the word they used was softo. So SOFUTO. In the Japanese tweet, which refers to physical game software specifically, while other terms are used to exclusively refer to digital games. So I think it's likely that they used software, the softo word, to refer to both physical and digital, because I figure if physical works, they're not going to cut off digital for any reason. Yeah. Now, that's not confirmed, but I think that's fair to say. And then there's the NSO, which they could obviously change the name to like Nintendo Online or Nintendo whatever the next console's name is online. But I do think the fact that it's going to carry forward means they're probably going to also carry forward the digital game libraries. So like Super Nintendo, Nintendo Entertainment System, N64, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance are all supported on there with pretty vast libraries. And in the past, whenever Nintendo has brought forward a service like this, which they haven't had before you had to buy individual games on Virtual Console, and then you had to buy all those games again. So the fact that they're bringing it forward means they're likely going to let you have all the same games on your next console. So if you're in the middle of, let's say you're playing Paper Mario on the Switch and you want to continue and you buy the new console, you'll probably get your progress carry forward as well, because all those games will be available. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think I had maybe seen maybe this tweet from maybe it was Al Babbins, but like just I heard news about the backwards compatibility, which was really exciting. I mean, I read that and I automatically assumed that it probably meant the games, but good to know that there was the Japanese speaker on Twitter who had mentioned that like the word of softo, and so yeah, it's interesting to even consider, like, if on some planet they thought, well, you know what, we're just gonna make, I don't know, some apps that are not game related compatible that were on the Switch and make it backwards compatible. That'd be very strange. Like, I don't see why they wouldn't bring over games.
Yeah, like YouTube is backwards compatible, everybody.
Yeah, oh no, wow. We were we had the player in mind. Like, they're really heartfelt about it. Yeah, like I mean, with the Switch's popularity, I would be flabbergasted if they just didn't end up like making it backwards compatible. And honestly, Nintendo's been pretty good about that with like the Wii and the Wii U, and the GameCube to the Wii, like everything there. Like I was really glad when I got a Wii U or a Wii, and I was able to play GameCube games because I didn't grow up with the GameCube. I basically went from N64 and then all the way to Wii. Nintendo wise, my brother had bought like an Xbox in between then, but I wasn't really playing that. Yeah, I think I think it's probably a pretty safe bet to assume that, you know, games are probably going to carry forward, and I assume digital and physical. And I hope that the game library for the NSO will carry forward, because I feel like with every new little bit of news about like, hey, this game is coming to Nintendo Switch Online, like this to the, you know, N64 library or to the SNES library, there's so many games that they can just add to it. So I feel like they barely scratched the surface for a lot of stuff there. So I would hope they would carry over, because like you said, like I think it would be maybe a bit of a game changer if they didn't, and then people would just have to like buy in again. But that being said, if they keep the price of the NSO around the same and allow the group pricing of like people, you know, each paying into a family plan and getting all together like that saves massive amounts of money on cost compared to subscriptions with like the PlayStation, for example. Because like, I mean, I'm on a family plan and up with you, and like it's really helpful for the year. To pay,
yeah, we pay $12 for the year, whereas on PlayStation you're paying like $100 a year. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a toss-up, but considering the Switch's popularity, I do think I do think most things, if not all things, will carry over in that regard. The exciting thing too is if they do carry everything forward and they don't start from scratch with the NSO game library, that means like, yeah, there's a few games on each system that are still missing, but I think the bigger thing here is that they're going to have to add a new system or two, and I mean, unless the next console can support DS, the only other console they can really add support for next, at least next in line, is the GameCube, which we've all been dying for the last decade on Virtual Console and NSO. So, like, if they don't start from scratch and they want to add new games to it, then they're going to have to go with the GameCube. And I think I still think it's wishful thinking. I think if Nintendo was really wanted to gouge us, they'd just keep remastering GameCube games. And to be honest, I would be happy with that too, because I think GameCube games have aged pretty well. And if I had to, even though I'd have to pay another 80 Canadian per game to get them remastered, if it means they look slightly better than streaming them on Nintendo Switch Online, I think I would be fine with that. But if they do add GameCube games, I mean, I would be excited. And you didn't have a GameCube, so there'd probably be lots of games you'd get to try that you didn't before.
Oh yeah, tons. Like I even though I had access to, you know, buying GameCube games when I had my Wii, I mean, I still didn't buy a whole lot just because I was mostly focused on, whoa, all these new Wii games. I want to buy them. I want to get Twilight Princess. I want to get Skyward Sword. I want to, you know, like I was really focused on all of those games. I think for the GameCube, I basically only played Super Smash Bros. Melee, and I think I owned Wind Waker, but I never played it until the Wii U version.
Fair.
I mean, and it was a great game. I was sad that I waited that long, but at the same time, the Wii U version had the fast sale, and that was a fucking game changer. So, yeah.
I'm waiting. I bought it on Wii U, but I don't boot up my Wii U that much, and I've had other stuff to play in the last couple of years since I bought it. So I'm really hoping that Nintendo's just gonna put it on the Wind Waker HD and the Twilight Princess HD ports on the Switch. Now there was, I don't really like to talk about rumors on the podcast because rumors are rumors, but someone recently did leak the Xenoblade Chronicles X port that's coming to Switch.
Yes.
And this person's track record, this person Samus Hunter on Twitter, their track record hasn't been great in the past. In fact, up until the Xenoblade Chronicles X leak, they've gotten nothing right. But now they're saying that there's a Zelda announcement coming this winter, as well as a Donkey Kong announcement. But I'm wondering if they're finally gonna, if the Switch, my theory about the Switch 2 is that it's not coming till next fall, for a variety of reasons. And if that's the case, then Nintendo's got to fill out their library for the next year. And the rumor for the last 5 years has been that Nintendo's just sitting on Wind Waker and Twilight Princess ports for the Switch. And even according to someone who worked there at the time, they have a break glass in case of emergency, put these on Switch button for these games. So hopefully I mean, I'd be fine with the GameCube versions, I guess, but I think I want the quality of life improvements and the lighting improvements from Wind Waker HD on the Switch. So
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the I did see the trailer for like announcing the port for X, which I was really, I mean, shocked about. Like the people have been waiting for people who really like Chronicles X. Have been waiting for
I
this game.
I specifically thought of you when they announced this game, actually.
You know, it's so fascinating too, because as much as I love it's like the Xenoblade series, especially 1 and 3, I had X and I played a bit of it. It was not for me. I wanted so badly to enjoy it, and it just wasn't my game. There's some really cool parts of that game, and for a Wii U title, oh my god, it was technologically like so far ahead of its time. But yeah, like I heard the news and I was like, well, that's awesome, because I know people have been waiting super long for X, because basically they went, oh, let's make Xenoblade 2 on Switch, and people were like, oh my god, Xenoblade 2, man, it's been so long since Xenoblade 1, and it was like a whole new kind of formula that Monolith did, and then they were like, oh, okay, we're gonna port and remake Xenoblade 1, make Definitive Edition, and everyone, including me, lost their minds with excitement. They were like, yes, of course, that's great, what a great idea. So then everyone's next step in thinking was, well, they're gonna remake X then, right? Because like that's the next logical step. It's the next game they made. And then they made 3, and I was still very happy because I really like 1 and 3. Like they're two of my favorite games, I'd say. But all the X fans were like, oh my gosh, where's the port? And so they just announced it out of nowhere, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I'm happy that they're happy and that they're getting that. But yeah, I would be interested. I would really like for them to put the Wind Waker HD port, even make it even nicer on the Switch too. That would be super nice. And I haven't played the HD remake or the HD port of Twilight Princess, so I would like to play that as well.
When I did buy them, I dabbled in both Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, and they both look really, really nice. I think Twilight Princess could use a little more enhancement, at least on the Switch. Mm-hmm. It's still a little... It plays fine, but like visually, like I think it needs a bit of a... I know they didn't redo the lighting and they didn't redo all the textures and models like they did for Wind Waker, and Wind Waker needed less work, I guess. But in Twilight Princess, like there's still a bit of I don't want to call it jank, but there's like still a bit of like hard edges to Link's model, for example, in the game that looks like it could be smoothed over a little bit to make it look a little bit nicer. It doesn't look the way you remember it looking, the way Wind Waker looks, like, you know what I mean? Like when you filter it through like nostalgia goggles, like the game looks better in your head. And then you see the remaster and it looks exactly like you thought it did 20 years ago, whereas I think Twilight Princess hasn't aged as well. But there was no problems with the gameplay, so...
Yeah, and that's like a big... It's an interesting thing to think about, too, because when Twilight Princess came out on the GameCube and the Wii, like, the graphics were, like, the big thing that everybody was like, oh my gosh, this is phenomenal for Zelda, because, like, it was... it was following up from Wind Waker, which was very cel-shaded and colorful and cartoony, which I know took some getting used to for some fans, but, like, coming off of, like, Majora's Mask. But then it went back to like, this is gritty and realistic and cool, and everything's dark, and I was like, this is neat. So I'm actually surprised that they didn't do a whole lot of smoothing for the HD port.
Well, I think the difference too is that the Wind Waker was done in-house by Nintendo, and Twilight Princess was done by an outside party.
Oh,
which might have had something to do with it. Now I know though the director of the game, whose name is escaping me right now, he's worked on all the Zelda games too. But he said he was involved in overseeing the port, but I don't think he was like as hands-on as he was when he was developing the original. So.
Okay, fair enough.
But moving on to the next headline, Sony commits to releasing major single-player games every year from 2025 onwards. So this comes from IGN, and they said, speaking during an investor call, Sony's finance and IR chief Sadahiko Hayakawa said that while it has no major first-party games coming out before the end of its current financial year, which ends in March 2025, the company plans to, quote, continue releasing major single-player game titles every year from next fiscal year onwards. So I know it's become a bit of a meme to joke about the lack of games on PS5, and there's been a lot of third-party support, like Final Fantasy games, for example. But Sony hasn't released a lot of first-party single-player AAA games in the PS5's lifespan. At least it doesn't feel like they have. And I did go through and make a list of all the games that they've released that are new, original, and not remakes or remasters. So, I mean, again, some remakes I did count here, like the Demon Souls remake, which is like a huge improvement on the original game. But there's been Astrobot, the Demon Souls remake, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, Spider-Man Miles Morales, and Sackboy were also on PS4. So I'm not even sure if they count because they're technically not exclusive. There's Gran Turismo 7 has some single player content. There are, again, a bunch of remasters and director's cuts. And even The Last of Us Part 1 counts as a remake. So it should be on this list, but it feels so similar in playability. Like, it just, like, I don't think it's a big enough improvement to call it really a remake, even though it technically is. There's also been Spider-Man 2, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, Returnal, Rise of the Ronin, and Stellar Blade. So there hasn't been like a lot, even though Sony has been releasing like 3 to 4 games every year, like big AAA games. But right now they only have 2 games coming out that they've actually announced. So there's Ghost of Yotei, which is the sequel to Ghost of Tsushima, and then they're working on, Insomniac is working on the Wolverine game, which Ghost of Yotei we know is coming next year, but we don't even know when Wolverine is supposed to be coming out. And they just lost, I think, their creative director on that game too, so who knows what's going on with that. But Nintendo has the Switch 1, for example. We don't know what's coming out with the Switch 2 next year, but the Switch 1 has 2 announced games that are brand new original AAA Nintendo games, and they're both confirmed for next year. And that's Metroid Prime 4 and Pokemon Legends ZA. So the fact that Nintendo has more games planned for a dying console than Sony has for a console that's in the middle of its lifespan, that just released brand new hardware, upgraded hardware, that's supposed to take advantage. Like, they didn't even announce any new games with the PS5 Pro. They just said, yeah, guess what? Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is going to look slightly better, guys. Look at the background pixels. They look so good. So I just think it's weird that a 4-year-old PlayStation console is like, we're all kind of wondering like what's going on with this. And they didn't even consider Astrobot AAA. They were like, the way they were talking about it was they priced it like a AAA game, but they talked about it like it was AA, like it was made by a small team, which it was. But that's their biggest game this year that's first party. So I'm curious, do you feel this way? Do you feel the way I do about Sony's lack of games on the PS5?
I it's interesting because I would say that I fully admit I probably play the PS5 far less than my partner does. So he's on it a lot more often. But like it's I mean, even just hearing you list off a bunch of the games, I mean, I didn't even, I was trying to think of a list. I was like, oh yeah, what AAA games did come out? And I couldn't even come up with like like that many. I was like, Horizon, there was like Miles Morales, but again, I thought about the PS4 question. And yeah, it's been so interesting because like with the hype with the PS5 when it released was that, I mean, it was PS5. It was the next big console. It had, you know, it was promoting the haptic feedback controllers, and they're great. They're fantastic. And I mean, it was so difficult to get one for a very long time. It probably might still be, to be honest. But, you know, my partner and I, we ended up buying one because we saw a post from Elle Babbins, and they were like, well, it's up on, you know, GameStop for like 5 minutes, and we went, sure, we're gonna try. So we ended up getting it that way. And most often when I want to buy a console, I usually have a game in mind that I want to buy it with, and I kind of did at the time, but it wasn't the driving force of me buying the PS5. So the first game that I bought for it was Horizon Forbidden West, which is a really great game. I still have to finish it, and I honestly might restart it to play it again, just because it's been so long since I've been at it. But yeah, like other than that, I haven't really been drawn necessarily to many of the AAA games that at least were PS5 exclusive. So it's a little disheartening to I mean, you spend a good amount of money on a big time console, and you'd hope that you'd have maybe, you know, 10, 15 games that you could be like, I'm really glad I bought this console so I could have access to these games. I was really excited for Final Fantasy 16 when it was announced, and in part because it was announced to be released on my birthday, so I went, oh, it must be fate. I'm going to buy this game. And I mean, I've had fun with it. You know, it's great. But with the speed that I also play or that I complete games, I should say, not just play them, like, I believe that 16 either is out or will soon be out for PC. I don't quite remember which. And I mean, I'm not done it yet.
I saw something about it coming to Xbox as well, so.
And yeah. And so I'm like, man, I'm not even done this game. And it's already like I have a good enough PC that I probably honestly could have waited to buy 16 just when it came out on PC, but it is nice to also have it on the TV, I suppose. But yeah, it's a little disheartening, especially when, I mean, if I come home from work and I say, you know what, yeah, I feel like playing something, my mind really doesn't often go to the PS5. I'll be like, I'm gonna sit down and play a bit of Switch. I'm gonna go through some demos I have on Switch, or I'm gonna play some of like, I've been wanting to replay Xenoblade 3 for a little bit, so I probably will go back and do that. Yeah, so it's definitely, it feels like it's a console that's lacking in terms of what's been released for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think on this list too, thinking about what I've played Astro Bot. I haven't finished it. That's not because I didn't enjoy it. It's because, again, my PS5 has been hijacked. I played Spider-Man Miles Morales, but I played that on PS4. I did pick up Sackboy on PS4. I never got around to it. But it was on sale, I think, the first year of the PS5, maybe the second year of the PS5, and it was on PS4 too, but the first year after it came out, it went on sale and I picked it up. I played through Spider-Man 2. I 100%'d it and got the platinum, and then I was disappointed to find out that it didn't have the post-game content that the original game had, and it wasn't going to have any DLC, which is a little disappointing.
Right. And
that's it. Oh, and I also played The Last of Us Part 1, the remake, and I did pick up, but I haven't started The Last of Us Part 2 remastered. And that's just because I'm a total slut for Last of Us games. If I wasn't such a huge fan of The Last of Us games and I couldn't play, like, I could replay them infinitely, like, if I wasn't like that, I would also be upset that Naughty Dog's only contribution to the PS5 has been remakes of their old games. So, and I think I did also pick up and play the Uncharted remasters that came out.
Yeah, the Uncharted games were great.
Yeah, they're so, like, again, Naughty Dog just makes such good games that I'm really sad that they haven't. I think that's the big gap for me, is that Naughty Dog hasn't put anything new out, and games take so long to make now, especially PS5 games, where they're trying to make them look so good and big and vast, and they're trying to get hundreds of hours of content out of them that they just take like a decade to make. So
yeah, and I mean, the other part for me too is, like, with AAA games, often, like, it's rare for me to go out and buy a game that at full price, a game that would cost, you know, like $90 to $100 Canadian, and like I wouldn't often be able to justify it. Usually within my budget, I try to wait for sales as much as I can. So I mean, with AAA games, when they announce, I'm like, that's really exciting. Like the only exceptions where I was like, yep, I'm gonna buy this day of, was Final Fantasy 16 because of the release date, partially, and Horizon, because I was like, I'm excited to try out this new controller haptic feedback thing that everyone's been raving about. And I mean, I think I've maybe known two people who have bought the PS5 Pro. Because I don't, personally for me, I don't see a whole lot of like merit in buying it. And I mean, maybe it'd be different if I didn't have a PS5 originally. Like, I know with the PS4, I ended up buying the Slim as my first PS4 console because I just didn't have the original.
Yeah, I did the
and that
same
was
thing.
fine. Yeah. And that was actually how I started with the Uncharted games too, because I ended up getting the little bundle that came with Uncharted 4.
I did the exact same thing.
Oh yeah, nice. Yeah, it was nice too, because I bought it probably when I was going into, this probably would have been around 2016, because I was going into university for my post undergrad stuff, and I remember it came with the fourth game, and I was like, cool. I haven't played the other games, but that's cool. I'll play this game eventually. And then my partner gave me the collection, like, as a gift. And then he was like, we can play them together. And then so we did. So, yeah, it was nice.
Okay, well, we have one last news story before we jump into today's segment. And this one will probably be fairly quick, just because it's just kind of like an aside. We've been talking about Dragon Age the Veilguard lately, and we were wondering how much queer content there would be. And I think the biggest news that's come out is obviously that you can have we've talked about it before, that you can have top surgery scars on your character if you so choose. But apparently, with the right dialogue choices now, your rook will acknowledge their transgender identity, if you choose, of course. So other characters will also acknowledge it throughout the game. And this comes from a Polygon article that summarizes the whole thing. But they state in the article, early on in the game, Rook unpacks their room. And I think Rook is the main character. I haven't been able to actually confirm that because I am lazy and I didn't actually look this up before the podcast. But early on in the game, Rook unpacks their room at the lighthouse and ponders 4 items. An item relating to their heritage, tools of the trade for their class as a rogue, mage, or warrior, a token from their background faction, and a handheld mirror. The handheld mirror allows Rook to reflect on their own identity as a hero. This includes some additional trees for scars, tattoos, and a trans non-binary identity. So I haven't played Veilguard yet, but this is a step in the right direction for video games. Like, some games let you roleplay as a specific character, others let you roleplay as anyone you want. But they rarely ever let you roleplay as someone who's transgender, whether you are or not transgender. So if someone wants to be able to play as a transgender character in this, that's great. And this goes double too for like non-binary players who have even less options for trans characters. I think Cyberpunk you can be transgender in that game. They don't really acknowledge it in the game too much, but I don't think you can be non-binary in Cyberpunk, for example. So. And then also too, if you're part of the binary, you can just play games with cis people of your gender, right? Like if I boot up Pokemon, like when I played Legends Arceus, like the main professor in that game, I think his name is Laventon, he just like piles on the gender euphoria. He's just like, my girl, my Zoe, like he just keeps like piling, and he uses your pronouns all the time. And if you play as a man, I'm certain it's probably the same thing. He probably calls you my boy. And he says like, use your chosen name and pronouns, but like there's no they, them option in Pokemon, for example.
Right,
so.
yeah. That's cool to hear about for Veilguard. That's awesome.
Have you played any of the Dragon Age games before?
I have not. Well, actually, no, not entirely true. I played a little bit of Dragon Age Origins on, I think my brother had a copy on like Xbox 360. Did not get very far. I know very little about Dragon Age. I have seen the trailer for Veilguard though, because I have some friends who are really into Dragon Age, and trailer looked awesome. I was like, this looks great. I'm super invested. Might not get it for full price, might wait for a sale, but I definitely would like to play it. And it's just really nice to hear that they're thinking about this stuff, just because like, I mean, I don't really recall many or any games that really would have this sort of option presented for when you're like kind of creating your character, I guess. I know there was another episode of True Avatars where you talked a little bit about like non-binary characters and non-binary like options and stuff. And I mean, it's just nice to see like these kinds of experiences normalized more in video games. Because I mean, and especially for like a AAA game like this, or I mean, I'd consider a AAA like a very, you know, a game that had a lot of money poured into it, I'm sure, for a very large franchise. Because often I'll see these kinds of like representation for, let's say, like non-binary identities for character selection in indie games, like you know, I'll talk a little bit probably about Arcade Spirits, and then there's also another game that was coming to mind when you were talking a bit, called A Long Journey to an Uncertain End, which is it has a really cool setup for your character creation, where, I mean, when you set your pronouns, you can set she, her, he, him, they, them, or you can have there's a whole other option to set your own custom pronouns, where you can type in, you can type in like, it'll have it listed to be like, this is your subject pronoun, your honorific, your possessive pronoun. And the examples that they give of like what you could put in are like neopronouns. So they'll say like Caesar or mix, right? And there's just a ton of variety. Just from like the first time where you create your character. And yeah, it's stuff like that is just really refreshing to hear, and stuff that I see often in indie games, but just really nice to hear that they're considering that kind of stuff for a game for a large franchise.
Yeah, I hope these these kinds of initiatives in video games continue, given what's going on in the US, where a lot of these games are actually made, because we don't see this in a lot of Japanese games, but a lot of these games are made in the US and they're made in Europe and they're made in Canada. So I do hope to see more of this stuff. I think for sure, like, we'll see something like this from Naughty Dog, and probably Mass Effect and Dragon Age have always been, and those are made by BioWare, they've always been very queer forward thinking. So hopefully the success of this game will hopefully inspire other games to consider these things from the outset of development instead of as an afterthought that most games do when they include anything at all.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to our segment for this week. I want to talk about exploring bisexuality and pansexuality through a video game lens. And I just want to start actually by explaining the difference for anyone who might not know, because it's a bit confusing. I know a lot of people aren't really sure what the difference between bisexuality and pansexuality is. So the way I understand it is that bisexuality is you're attracted to two or more genders. It's not just the two gender binary, like a man and woman. It can be two or more genders, and there are many, many genders for anyone listening who thinks there's only two. It's not just, or even three, for example. It's not just, man, woman, and non-binary. There's like a whole spectrum of gender identities. But anyway, so bisexuality is you're attracted to two or more genders, and the gender of the person is part of what attracts you to them. So if I'm bisexual, I'm attracted to men. The things that attracts me to men is not the same thing that attracts me to women. Like, if I'm attracted to a woman, there's a specific reason. There's something about her gender specifically that makes her attractive to me. And same with men. There's something masculine about him that attracts him to me. Whereas pansexuality is you're attracted to multiple genders, but the gender of the person you're attracted to isn't necessarily relevant to why you find them attractive. It's almost like you're gender blind in a sense. But to simplify, basically, bisexuality is attracted to two or more genders, and pansexuality is attracted to people regardless of their gender. I think that's the simpler way to explain it. Does this line up with what you've discovered so far?
Yeah. I've been exploring and kind of looking more into pansexuality a bit, and my I guess journey with my bisexual like orientation and identity as well is an interesting one, because when I was growing up, I mean, we're like the community and the home that I was raised in wasn't necessarily like, I never felt that it was ever like anti-gay or anything, like explicitly. Like, I never felt like that it was a danger to be gay or anything like that. But it was also a time where it was not really talked about, and it was a time where, like, you could be mocked for being it by like kids and stuff. Like, growing up, you'd be like, oh, called like, like a slur of some kind relating to sexual identity. And, they wouldn't even know what it meant. They'd be like, oh, like, we're just going to call you that to bully you or something, right? Middle school kids and stuff. But growing up, like, in that kind of atmosphere, I was like, well, yeah, no, I think I'm heterosexual. Like, I like guys. They're very attractive. But I remember being like super young, and, I'd be like on my street, and there'd be like a little girl walking by, and she had this like gorgeous little dress, right? And I'd be like, wow, like, she's so gorgeous. She's so pretty. And then like my parents would be like, well, yeah, she's not like you should definitely call her pretty. She's not like, handsome, or like something that would imply that it's like, oh, you look so dapper, or you look so nice, as it would be for like a man or something. And I'd be like, yeah, okay, girls are pretty, but it doesn't mean I like girls. Like, that kind of thing, which was like not something that my parents told me, but it's something that was like in my head, just because like my understanding of being gay was that if I was queer in any sense, I would have to be either gay, like I would have to either be a lesbian or be heterosexual. And I wasn't even thinking about bisexuality at that point. Obviously, I didn't even know what that was when I was really young. And I kind of like tucked it away for a long time. Like, I was definitely like, I definitely had like crushes on girls, and like mostly they were like, to be honest, in like video games and stuff. But I was like, wow, they're so pretty. But I kept like doing that whole thing of like, they're pretty, I admire them, but men are great. Men are 10 out of 10. And so that was what I was doing for a long time. And then as I got older, I thought, you know what, like maybe I'm like biromantic. I can see like being in like a nice relationship with a woman. Like that's really cool. And so that was like how I just identified for a very long time. And it was really only until recently that I just kind of sat back and I was like, you know what, I've been suppressing a lot of this. And I don't think that's like, I think bisexuality does actually match up very well with my own like sexual orientation and identity. And I mean, I was even having like, you know, the kind of like hurtful thoughts of like, well, how can I be bisexual? I've never been in a relationship with a woman, which is like BS. And I understand that. Like I can still be attracted to women without having been in a relationship with them. But I think it was just all these like weird blocks that were coming up that I was just like, yeah, no, I'm like, I can't be this because of this. And it would just like come up. So I'm very happy that I've been kind of coming into that more and just like accepting it more. And there's been like little hints too, like throughout, and I'll talk a little bit about it with the games that I'll talk about later. But, yeah, it's just like things where I'm like, I know if I like told my parents, like they'd be like, yeah, that's cool. Like they might be a little surprised, but like I wouldn't be scared or anything. So, yeah, it's been an interesting journey in that regard. And for pansexuality, like that's just something that like I don't have as much knowledge about, I guess I would say. But I'm interested to talk more about it because I think I have some interesting tidbits to talk about video game character-wise, when it comes to pansexuality.
Well, you mentioned, not being able like to accept yourself and like, you know, thinking like women are attractive, but I'm not necessarily attracted to them, and not letting yourself, like you said, you didn't even understand that bisexuality was like a possibility. Mm-hmm. Like before I transitioned, I considered myself a straight man who was attracted, and a heterosexual man too. Like, I should have said, I consider myself a cis man who was heterosexual and attracted to women. But I would always look in the mirror and said like, wow, if I was a girl, I would be very attracted to men, because my understanding of like, I'm still like putting the puzzle pieces together of my bisexuality. Because like, I understand how I'm attracted to women. And even before I came out, like my understanding of my attraction to women was like buried under my trans suppression. So deep down that like sometimes I didn't know if I was attracted to a certain woman, or if I just wanted to like look like her, or if I wanted to be friends with her. And then so I transitioned and I unpacked that, and now I'm still unpacking like how attracted to men am I, and like why am I attracted to men now that my body is right, but before I was attracted to women no matter what. And so like I've like dabbled with the concept of like maybe I'm like heterosexual and biromantic, or maybe I'm like and people also talk about, I don't know if I've really spoken about this in depth before with anyone, but people I see it's kind of a meme. People talk about the bi-cycle, which is punny, but where like there's like periods of time where you're attracted to one gender, and then the period of time where you're attracted to another. Like I could go months without thinking about men at all, and then suddenly like something just hits one day, and it's not even necessarily a certain man that triggers it, or a certain thought. It's just like bam, suddenly like, yeah, like men are great now. And then a couple weeks will go by and I'll be like, no, just women.
Just women.
So, but yeah, I did want to ask you, you mentioned like games and characters and stuff that have helped you explore. So I'll just ask you kind of a broad question. How have video games helped you explore the difference between bisexuality and pansexuality, and how has it helped you in finding your labels? Like what kind of games have you been playing? Like, I'll just open it up to basically whatever you want to talk about, because I want to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Yeah. It's been really like refreshing and freeing to play certain games that kind of some of which would have like romance options, not all of them necessarily, but just like games that would either have a character who is bisexual, or even having romance options where it's like you can pick between these characters who identify as male, or these characters who identify as female, or these non-binary characters. And it's just been really nice to see how like it paints a really beautiful and detailed picture of how romance can bloom in all these different ways. It's not just, very black and white. It's not just one or the other necessarily, which is like what I was growing up with the idea of. I was like, I'm either a lesbian or I'm heterosexual. And so when it comes to like video games and exploring that, I remember like there have been games where it's felt a bit limiting, like games that I've played probably when I was a teenager. For example, Fire Emblem Awakening. So I haven't played many Fire Emblem games, but that was one that I really enjoyed. That's the 3DS one, right? Yeah. And that one, I really enjoyed it. It's still a really solid game, and probably one of my favorites for the handheld Fire Emblems, because Conquest and the other one was not my thing. But but with Awakening, they basically set it up so that depending on the gender that you decided on for the game, it put up a barrier for any romantic relationships that you wanted to have with a character of the same gender. And I mean, you could have like if you were a male character, you could have a bromance, or if you were a female character, you could have like a female bestie, and like you can still have like nice friendships and stuff. But it did feel a little bit like it did feel like a barrier, because I have always identified as a female with she her pronouns, so I'm usually picking she her for my characters, and so I would do that, and then I'd be like, oh man, like she's so cool, like she's like I'd have a crush on like I don't know if this is gonna at me, but I'm gonna say Tharja, who's a little bit like she's very like goth and probably problematic, to be honest, but she's so cool, and she's like a witch of sorts. She's like a goth witch energy. She's really cool. But there was that barrier, and I was like, like I really wish like that there would be other options, because at the time I heard of other video games that had like, hey, you could have gay romance, and I'm like, that's really cool. Not to say that I didn't like who I ended up romancing, because he had who I ended up romancing was Frederick, who has a phenomenal story, which is not like super in depth or anything. It's literally just most of the interactions you have with him is that I think he like talks about that he's never eaten bear meat before, and he's like, oh god, I never will, like it's vile, and I had a bad experience with a bear or something, and then you eventually just get him to eat bear meat or something, and then he's like, wow, marry me. And it was so funny, and I love Frederick. He also had one of the coolest like combat phrases when you could do his like special attacks, because every character has that when they're like, basically it's like a crit if they land like a extra damage, but it would basically do a little zoom in on their face, and he would go, pick a god and pray, and I'm like, oh dang, like it was so epic. So anyway, that was a game that I guess was a little bit limiting, but I have played a lot of like I guess a lot more indie games where there's just a lot more of those options, and it has given me some interesting opportunities to kind of explore bisexuality and pansexuality, as I was thinking about this too. I think probably one of the games that really stands out to me in this regard is Arcade Spirits, which I mentioned briefly. And Arcade Spirits is a dating sim that is focused around you make a character. The world is kind of like a neo you're in a very futuristic city. I think they literally call the year 20XX with two big capital X's. And and you like just lost your job. I think you just got out of a relationship that wasn't great, and you're feeling kind of bummed about life. And then you find out using this app that you download that's like kind of like an AI assistant of sorts. You find out about that there's a job opening at a nearby arcade. So you go and you apply, and you end up getting hired at this arcade, and you meet a whole plethora of really cool characters, 7 of which you can romance in the game. And and the game ends up being a bit of a, I won't spoil too much about the story, but it ends up being kind of like a, you make some really meaningful relationship at this arcade, and at some point capitalism tries to bite you in the butt, and you have to save the arcade, and that's the whole kind of main story for it. And when I played Arcade Spirits, I had so when I started, I was like, I don't know who I'm gonna romance, like we'll see. And I was meeting a bunch of characters, and I met one, like I think he was maybe the 4th or 5th character you meet, named Percy. He's very sweet. He's this ginger, large, kind of maybe intimidating looking, but very sweet kind of man who loves to play this specific arcade game called like Mr. Moopy's Magic Maze or something. And he's like, I want to get the top score, and there's like a whole there's actually a very heartfelt and meaningful reason for him wanting to get the top score, but I was like, yeah, this guy is so sweet. I'll definitely want to go for him. That's my choice. I'm gonna go for Percy. And so I was playing through the game, and I didn't really realize it, but after I had been like, yep, I'm gonna select these options that I think will put me in good graces with Percy, because depending on your choices, each character has like a specific personality type that they kind of like gear themselves towards. I don't remember what Percy's was, but there's like different personality types. Like when you make a decision, is it a quirky decision? Is it a fun decision? Is it a serious decision? You know, and they all gear to either quirky, serious, fun, you know, all that stuff. So I was trying to match my answers to Percy. And at one point in the game, you meet up with one of the arcade staff named Ashley, who is very sweet. She's like this nice blonde-haired, very colorful character, very happy kind of character, and someone who I was just like, oh, she's very sweet. I'd love to be friends with her, right? I wasn't immediately attracted to her like in terms of gender. I was just like, she's really nice, and that's great. I like her. Percy, I was like, oh, he's hot. That's cool. And so when Ashley came up a little bit later, there's a point in the game where you go to a convention, and I guess I'm gonna spoil a bit of the game here and also Percy's route.
That's completely fine. I'll put a warning in the podcast notes.
Oh, okay, thank you. Where you go to a convention to basically promote the arcade, because it needs to drum up some more interest from the locals. And so you go to the convention, you're like handing out flyers and stuff about the arcade, and you're in cosplay. You're in this little like maid outfit that Ashley was like, oh, you'd look great in this. Like, I'm gonna wear a tux. You can be in a maid outfit. And I should also mention that with the character creation, you can also select he, him, she, her, and they, them, and you can make your character look. Honestly, the character in general looks pretty close to non-binary. Like they don't have a ton of options for customization, but they don't really tend towards one or the other very well. So like it's kind of nice to have that too. So when you're cosplaying, you know, I think you go up for like a cosplay show, and then at the end, and I think you might have won an award, I can't quite remember, but you get up on stage, Ashley's with you, and she's like, wow, thank you so much, you know, please check out the arcade, and then you have like a little aside with her after, and she's like, wow, that was amazing, like, you know, I'm so glad that you came up with me. And she's also wearing I've mentioned she's wearing like a tux. She's also wearing like a fake mustache, so she's kind of going for like a male presenting butler, I guess, kind of idea. And anyway, she's talking with you, and she goes like, yeah, like cosplay just really makes me feel like I can be more myself, and it's really freeing, you know. And I've been thinking a lot about like, you know, how sometimes it feels kind of nice to wear like these like male clothes, and that kind of gave me a light to be like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if she's like thinking about her identity a little bit more in terms of gender. That's neat. And then the show ends, and you, I think you go through a little like spy sleuthing segment with her, trying to find out some information. But at the end of that, there's an option. Like an option was presented to me to be like, oh, do you want to hang out with Ashley? Do you want to go talk to Ashley more? And I sat there on stream for like, because I was streaming it for like, I don't know, 5 minutes, where I was like, oh, I really like you. Like, oh, and I was confused, because I was like, but I said I was gonna go for Percy. And at the time I just didn't really like, I was like, I don't know if I really want to mess anything up, but I really like her. So I did end up like kind of defaulting to Percy. I said, no, I'll just like stay friends with her, and like I'm gonna explore her route later for sure. And
game, sorry to cut you off, does the game let you date multiple people?
Yes. Like as in you don't pick one person, as in it's like,
yeah, can you pick multiple people? Like, can you try multiple romance paths at the same time?
You know, I don't quite know. I know you can definitely earn points, like romance points for different characters, like throughout. So I mean, I could have like 5 hearts with Percy and like 4 with Ashley or something. I don't know if there's an ending where you end up with both of them though. So,
okay.
But I ended up going more with Percy, and he had a really nice route that was very heartfelt, and it was around like there's a lot of dramatic stuff with just like he was very, very like um how would I describe it? He's a very like closed off individual because he has like a heart condition and he doesn't want to like attach to anyone because he only has like 2 years to live basically. And he was like, oh, I don't want to put that burden on someone. And it ends up being like, you know, really sweet. Like you end up together, and I think he ends up getting some medicine which will help quite a bit with the heart condition, which will also prolong the life. Yeah, it ends up being really sweet. But for a long time I was like, oh my gosh, like what if I went with Ashley? That would have been so fascinating. And it made me think about like pansexuality in the sense of like maybe like maybe in her route, maybe she wasn't feeling like she was identifying with as a woman. Maybe she felt, based on that little aside conversation, that maybe she felt better with like he him pronouns or they them. I don't actually know. I've seen a bit of her route, but I haven't seen like the ending, I should say, quote unquote, with her. But that was just an interesting example, I think, where I was like, yeah, I didn't really feel attracted to her I didn't really think about her gender in that regards. I was just like, she's cool, I really like her. And then we had that like cosplay competition, and I thought, she's so cool, like she's so sweet and so funny and I like her. And I was like, maybe this is an example of like, maybe I am pansexual, I don't know. But
well, can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. Did your attraction to her change at all when you found out she might be transgender?
I don't think it was related to that part. It was more so when like we were cosplaying and like before she had that talk with me, where we were just having fun. And she's so funny. She makes like, she's really like, oh, you should try this on. We should have like a little photo shoot and all that stuff. And she's just really bubbly. And it just made me like be like, oh, she's so sweet. Like, I love this. And then when that came up, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But it didn't really affect how I would say how I would have maybe like regarded her as like a romance option. I didn't even know her romance option was possible because I thought I was just going straight for Percy. And then at the end of it, the game was like, hey, you want to talk with Ashley? And I went, maybe? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just interesting stuff. And like, in terms of like, also with regards to like a character who I was definitely attracted to, but didn't really think about their gender at all, I think a little bit to in a game I mentioned earlier called In Stars and Time, which is not a game with like romance options where you like create a character. Like it's you're given a character and then you experience the story as it's given to you. And In Stars and Time is a time loop RPG where you're playing as a party of adventurers who, they at the start of the game, they're at the end of their journey. They've come to the castle to defeat the enemy, who is known as the king, as he's frozen a lot of people in time in the kingdom. So they're just frozen on the spot. And the idea is that if you go and defeat him, then time will unfreeze and everything will be good and it will be great. So your main character you play as is called Sifrine. They use he, they pronouns. And one of the characters in your party that I latched onto as like my favorite character, like basically immediately, is called Isabeau. And for all intents and purposes, he's probably considered like a fighter class by RPG standards. He likes to throw a lot of punches and fights when there's enemies. And I immediately was like, oh, I have such a crush on him because he's so endearing. He's so funny. He likes to crack puns all the time with Sifrine. He definitely has like a close connection and like a highly implied crush on Sifrine for most of the game. So I was like, oh, I'm going to be rooting for them. That's great. But me playing as the character Sifrine, I was like, oh, he's so sweet to me. I love this guy. He's great. The designs of the character designs of the game are very cartoony, round, like almost a little bit like old time Mickey Mouse in style, I suppose, in Mickey Mouse cartoon. It's all black and white as well. And so I would never look at Isabeau and say, wow, he's hot. He's so hot. He's so attractive. Like I was always just like, I love him. He's great. He's so funny, right? And I think the character design kind of played into that, is why I mentioned it. But there's a wonderful moment in like Act 3 or 4 of the game, and it'll be a little bit of spoilers for In Stars and Time, but there's a point where Siffrin gets to go around and talk with your party members, and you help them out with something in their day-to-day life, and then they just have a nice little moment with Siffrin where they open up a little bit more to him. And with Isabeau's moment, it's a moment where he lays down with Siffrin on a grassy hill. They're together lying down looking up at the stars. It's nighttime. And he tells Siffrin about his transition because he's a trans male. And he was saying like how much happier he feels as himself in this moment. And it was just like, throughout the whole game, I was just like, I just love this character. He's so like, if I met him in real life, I 100% would have a crush on him, but I wouldn't feel it based on like attraction of gender, I would say. I mean, it'd be probably a little bit strange if he like came up to me and he was in the style of the game in real life, but I feel like it was one of those situations where it was like, yeah, maybe that could be like a part of like, it could be an example of pansexuality. But of course, in this case, I was like, whole game, I was like rooting for him and Siffrin. I was like, oh, I hope you guys get together because you're so cute. And it's a good payoff.
I'm just looking something up right now on Google. So, okay, so I think the word I was looking for was demisexuality.
Okay.
And I don't want to put you on the spot either. So if
cool.
this isn't something like, I'm like, hey, I'm trying to help you figure this out because I think it feels like kind of a bit of a puzzle because I'm listening to what you're telling me and like the sense I'm getting is that like maybe you're demisexual.
Perhaps. I mean,
and for anyone who doesn't know what demisexual is, who's listening, it's when you're attracted to someone only after you've developed an emotional connection with them.
I have heard that. Okay.
So what you're describing to me is that like you might be pansexual for sure. Like that might be part of it because what it sounds to me is like that you don't seem to. Then the two examples you brought up from the arcade game that you mentioned, whose name I've already forgotten. I'm so sorry. I had it pulled up here too.
That's okay.
Arcade Spirits.
Yes.
And in Stars in Time. In both examples, it sounds like you're just very attracted to the personalities of the people in both games. And actually, there were 3 examples. Obviously, there were 2 in Arcade Spirits, but anyway, sorry.
Well, I mean, no, totally interesting and valid, honestly. Like I mean, here's the thing too, like I do find like gender attractive though, like for men and women. Like there are times where I was like, oh, she's so hot, or that man, oh, he's gorgeous, like 100%. So like it's a little bit of a, I guess, like both, like and I'm still exploring that. So but definitely like what you're describing is demisexual, like 100%. I can see that as something that I can identify with as well.
Well, your situation sounds very similar to mine in that I'm still like, I'm trying with my partner ethical non-monogamy, and I'm like interested. I want to kind of explore relations with men because I want to explore how bi am I really. Like I'm not saying that my bisexuality is validated by actually dating anyone who isn't my partner. But there are some times where like the way I'm attracted to men is so different from the way I'm attracted to women. Like for men, like it's not so much a physical thing as it is like when men are nice to me or when they make me feel safe, like I feel much more interested in them either romantically or sexually. So like your situation, like for men, like it's definitely a personality thing for sure. And for women, sometimes that is the case. Like for example, I'm really deeply in love with my partner. I find her very attractive, but also like her personality, like we just like, to quote Deadpool, like her crazy matches my crazy.
Yeah.
And I think that is a big part of what makes me attracted to anyone is like when we vibe well.
Yeah, I
like
get that.
If I'm dating, if I'm on dating apps with men and like, I can't like pinpoint whether he makes me feel safe or not. Like I immediately find
you need
him
to know
less
the
attractive.
person. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, anyway, I guess I'm just so invested in your story because it sounds very similar to mine in that like, I'm not 100% sure of anything. And like, maybe I should be doing what you're doing is I should play more video games to explore that because it sounds like you're asking yourself the right questions. So
well, it's all a journey, right? And I think that's the exciting part of it because like it was so interesting too. Like I mean, I mentioned that the me coming to terms or to not coming to terms, but like accepting and being more accepting of like bisexuality is something that is like fairly recent as like an official yes, I am bisexual moment for me. And immediately I went like, oh, but what about pansexual? Oh, I should look into that, right? And then that's making me think of different things. Like, I mean, Arcade Spirits, like I played this route 2 years ago, maybe. Like I'm thinking about this now because it's something that is more relevant to my identity and my acceptance now. I was just kind of confused when I played Arcade Spirits. I was like, okay, that's cool. Anyway, Percy. But yeah, no, the best part about this whole thing is honestly, I mean, it is a little bit of a confusing time, obviously, but it's just kind of, there's some excitement in it, right? To figure out like what works for you, like what resonates most with you. And sometimes that answer is not always going to be concrete.
Yeah, no, for sure. And if it makes you feel any better, when I came out as a transgender woman, that was like, obviously it took me many years to accept that in myself and realize like, oh, wanting to be a girl means you are a girl. Like for years I spent like thinking like, I really want to be trans.
Yeah.
I wish I was trans. And then I didn't realize that meant I was. But then when I finally figured that out, I was like, well, that was easy. Like wanting to be a girl meant like I always wanted to be a girl. And so like in deep down, I always knew that was the easy part. And even though like deep down, I also told myself like if I was a girl, I would date men. But like even now that I'm a girl, like I still find myself grappling with questions of bisexuality, pansexuality, demisexuality. And so like it's not easy to find these, and especially too like if you're in a monogamous relationship, and I'm not saying like this is the same experience for everyone, but I knew for me I wouldn't be able to answer those questions without exploring things with other partners.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so I can't see myself living like, I can see myself being with my partner until the end of time.
Yeah.
But also like there's no one else I'd rather like settle down with, but also I do want to explore that other side of myself too. So
yeah, no, totally valid. Yeah.
So I think we're getting to the end of our bit of a time limit on our call right now, but I wanted to ask you for some because I have a list of video games here that I think have some good bisexual or pansexual romance options, and I was wondering if you had any to add to the list, just for anyone who might want to explore a game where you can actually romance different options, because obviously you could go play a certain game and try one romance option and then go play a different game and try that, but I think it's fun when the game has like multiple options. So some of the games I've came up with were, and a lot of these are through research I found on the internet, but some of them I have played, like Life is Strange True Colors. That's the third Life is Strange game, and the recent one that just came out, Double Exposure, which I talked about last week, also has bisexual romance options. Not to the same degree that True Colors has. It's entirely different, but you can do both.
Cool.
And then there's Stardew Valley. That's a big, very popular one that I'm sure everyone already knows about. Skyrim, Baldur's Gate 3. I actually realized Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and several other Assassin's Creed games, although this is the one that kept coming up, is that Assassin's Creed games, of all things, like Ubisoft is honestly sometimes a terrible company with the way they treat their workers, but I was very surprised to hear that Assassin's Creed has bisexual romance options. Same with the Fallout series. I was surprised by that. Sims 2, 3, and 4 I wasn't so surprised by.
Yeah.
Hades and this next game I'll mention have poly dating as well, not just bisexual, but you can also date multiple people at one time if you want. And so the other game I actually found, I saw a post on Reddit on Our Girl Gamers called Potionomics, which is a management sim where you own a potion shop. So basically you play as a woman named Sylvia, managing her potion shop, and she's basically broke and trying to get this shop up and running and bring it back from the brink of death, basically. And you can romance men or women, or men and women. So early on in the game, they prompt you with like, do you want to be monogamous or do you want to be polyamorous? The only thing is you can't play as a man or you can't play as a non-binary person. You have to play as a woman. So if you're anyone who doesn't identify as a woman, then that obviously might present a bit of a problem for you. I know if I was a trans man, it probably would, because as a trans woman too, I don't really like playing as men unless I'm playing as like a very specific character. Something else about the game has to allure me to it, for me to want to play as a different gender. Like if I'm playing Final Fantasy, obviously I'm playing as Cloud, so. But for anyone who's interested in Potionomics, it's 20% off on Steam until November 19th. So I just wanted to promote that indie game because I think it's really cool that they've added a polyamorous in a recent update, polyamory in a recent update. But it's also on Switch, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S, but it's currently not on sale on any of those other platforms, just on Steam. But I was curious if, Amy, you had any other games to add to this list?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm definitely going to add Potionomics to my wish list because that sounds awesome. Yeah, so in terms of like, I mean, obviously I mentioned Arcade Spirits. Like you can romance men and women. And I don't know, there might be a non-binary character. I think there actually is, but I didn't actually end up going that route. But Arcade Spirits is a good one. Arcade Spirits: The New Challengers is a follow-up game. It's not a sequel, but it's in the same world and has a lot more options for character creation as well as just romance options in that regard. So I haven't played much of it, but just from what I've heard, it sounds amazing. I definitely would agree with Baldur's Gate 3 because I frequently experience what I would probably categorize as bi panic when I see Karlach and I have a conversation with Karlach and I have a conversation with Halsin because like, oh my god, they're just both so perfect. I'm like, how am I going to pick? This is so difficult. But in terms of games not mentioned, if anyone is interested in more like dating sim kind of games, if you're kind of interested in a comedy, kind of like a fun comedic premise, I definitely would recommend any of the Monster Prom games. There are 3 of them, I believe. And then I would also recommend Doomsday Paradise. So Monster Prom is the premise of that is that, you know, you're a character who goes to school with all these different cool anthropomorphic monsters. And you're in like a high school and prom's coming up and you're like, oh, I need to find somebody to go to prom with. And with Monster Prom, like based on the endings, there is at the very least there is one polyamorous ending that I know of. It is technically categorized as an orgy, so it's a little bit like not a relationship necessarily, but it is like a funny thing that you can get. My friend and I were playing Monster Prom on stream for many, many months, and we ended on that ending, and we're like, all right, we're good, we're done, we've done everything we can for Monster Prom, this is the peak ending, it's great. But you can also, like, you can romance, you can romance, like, characters who identify as men and women, and you yourself, I believe you can also set your pronouns in the first game. I haven't played much of the second game, and I know the third game is more of like a strategy game, like you're on a road trip together and you have to like basically it's like a resource management kind of game. Like you're trying to survive the road trip, make sure you have your food and everything. A little bit like Oregon Trail actually. And I believe you have some romance options there as well. And then Doomsday Paradise is a game that I've been playing a lot more lately with the same friend on stream because it is a little similar in vibe to Monster Prom. But the premise is that you are you live in a community of, once again, anthropomorphized monsters, and the apocalypse is going to come in like 5 to 7 days, depending on what difficulty you set. And you want to find a date before the world ends because you want to spend the end of days together. So the idea is that you would basically just kind of, you talk to people, you have funny little conversations. There's a whole array of characters, from a vampire with like the attitude of a 6-year-old to like a seafaring marine biologist who looks like he should be in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and a young monster girl who loves horror movies. And in that game, while the original intention is that, like, kind of like Monster Prom, where you're like, I want to try to go for this person. You set it up from the get-go. You're like, I'm going to do this. It doesn't mean that you're going to end up with that character, because the endings just depends on what like scenes you get with characters. So often, like, I'll pick, I'll want to pick the vampire or something for Doomsday, and I'll end up with him. But what might happen is that I might end up with him and someone else in like a polyamorous relationship, and it's super nice. And so there is polyamorous options there, as well as just, different kind of options with different characters that are monogamous as well. And yeah, and even like, also similar to Monster Prom, like there's secret characters that you can end up romancing. So while yes, you can decide that I want to go for the marine biologist, you could encounter a secret character and end up romancing them. And that's kind of fun too. Monster Prom does that as well. So yeah, I'd recommend both of them. They're both very funny games. Like they're so funny. And they're really fun to play with people. My friend Mochi and I play them, like, I think we play them every other Wednesday. Well, we play Doomsday Paradise lately every other Wednesday on stream. But we used to do the same thing with Monster Prom. So highly recommend if you want to just sit down and play with a friend, or if you just want to try a bunch of routes yourself. It's just very freeing to have all those different kinds of options.
So I have one more question for you before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Does the gender of the player character matter when romancing someone? Like, do you have to be playing as a woman to have romance options? When you're considering your romance options, sorry, I should say. Like, if you were playing as a man, would that affect how you date in a game?
Like how I would date. Oh, that's an interesting one.
I mean, it's a pretty broad and open-ended question. If you don't have a definitive answer either, that's totally cool. It's just like, for me, when I'm romancing, like, I thought it would matter, actually. So I'll give an example. It's like, sometimes it does matter. Like, in the Life is Strange games, I'm really glad I'm always playing as a woman in those games and romancing different people. But when I was playing as Cloud, I was very invested in Aerith. I was like, Aerith, she's the girl. Like, I know Tifa is canon, but like, I was like, if I was in Cloud's shoes, or if I was in this world and Aerith was gay, I would be trying to romance Aerith, because I think she's so sweet and so nice. And I think she's the right girl for Cloud. I think if Cloud was going to be with Tifa, that would have happened years ago. But like, Aerith is the girl that's there. She's right in front of you, and she obviously has a type. She obviously likes soldier boys. Yeah. But, anyway, I was just like, I didn't know that about myself until I played Final Fantasy, and suddenly I was just like, I forgot that Cloud was a man, and I was just like, I was putting myself on Cloud, in place of Cloud, trying to romance Aerith.
Right.
Both because I thought she should be with Cloud, but also because I found her interesting and attractive. And I was wondering if you've had any experiences like that.
Yeah. Sometimes it can influence me, I feel like. I think back a little bit to like, I played Persona 4 a couple months ago now, and I played it to completion. And while the character romances like take a bit of a backseat to the story, because it's kind of more so played up as a, hey, if you have someone that you get all of your hearts up with, then they support you better in battle, I believe. I could be wrong about that, don't quote me, it's been a while. But they give you some boon, I think. They give you some support. And in that game, like, your character is like, I don't actually remember I don't remember his actual name, but you play as a young male who's got silver hair and glasses, and he's the new like person. He's a new kid who's like moved into the village. And I remember I ended up romancing Chie for that one. And in part because I was like, oh, Chie's got so much personality. I love her. Like this seems like they'd be really good together. But yeah, I feel like it probably relates more to like, I guess, how the player character is either portrayed or how the player portrays them, because like for dating sim games, like it's very easy for me to just put myself in that role because I'm creating a character, and I'm like, yep, that's me. And then and often they're kind of set up to be very basic, like kind of blank canvases, so that you can allow either self-insert or create your own character. So I don't often feel like, I guess, a specific, like if I'm playing as a certain gender and it's a dating sim, I don't often feel that necessarily, because I usually kind of by default self-insert. Right. But with games like, well, let's say like Final Fantasy 16, like, I mean, I wouldn't say there's necessarily like lots of options necessarily, but like romance, in terms of romance options for Clive, because the game pretty like blatantly says, hey, yep, it's him and Jill. That's the thing. So in that case, I'm like, yeah, no, of course they're good together. Like that's definitely the kind of like that they match each other really well. I do have some issues with how her character goes, but that's a story for another time. Yeah, I think like, I guess it depends for me on how the story is set up, and how the like game mechanics are set up, because as I said, dating sims, I usually wouldn't really care that much, but if a story was set up to have several, like maybe like 2 or 3 options for like romance interests, and the story seems to be like, you're kind of envisioning like, yep, this is where the story's going, I think they look good together. Yeah, I definitely would probably be like, yeah, this is good for this character who I'm playing, based like in part based on their gender, but just based on like how the story is going and how the character, I guess, develops, how the player character develops over time.
Well, thank you for that answer. We're almost out of time. My computer's actually telling me, I guess I haven't cleared out my storage space. It's telling me I'm about to run out of storage.
No
so I think this is as good a time as any to wrap up, but I really, really do appreciate you joining me this week. You had some great insights and I really liked hearing from you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I was really excited to be on. I was all like excited today. I was like, oh, I'm going to write my notes for prep, and ended up writing like 5 pages.
Oh my gosh. Well, we'll have to have you back on in case we didn't cover everything.
Oh, I'm so excited. That'd be great.
All right. Well, I look forward to that. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. And I will see all you true avatars next week.